Okay, thanks very much. Just want to say a big thank you for inviting us. Feel very honoured to be here, actually. We're both very, very nervous, so we're going to get straight into it.
I think so, yeah.
One of the things about being designers is that they never teach you how to be public speakers, and we've never presented to an audience this big, so it's quite humbling to be here. Just a little bit about us, as we're 10 years old next week, in fact. We're a very small graphic design agency based in London, and we, like most designers, get bored extremely quickly. We have a very low tolerance threshold for boredom, so we like to keep ourselves really, really busy. And the way to do that is to have lots and lots of projects, and we're constantly juggling between projects in the studio, and we love that idea of keeping our brains ticking over. So it's a slightly odd title, the one we called it. So I thought to explain that, and this is coming back to a very simplistic version of David's diagram that he showed earlier on. This is very non-scientific, I have to say. And the way we approach our work really is just if we can enjoy and amuse ourselves and entertain our own minds, tickle our own minds effectively when we're doing our own work, hopefully that will come across in the minds of the people that we're trying to get the message across to. And I think that's a theme that's kind of been picked up quite a lot today. The joy of actually doing this work is a real privilege. We're always slightly amazed that people actually pay us for doing this in the first place. But there you go.
Yeah, what we'd like to do is just take you through 19 projects. So we're going to have to whip through them quite quickly. That hopefully sort of exercise people's minds. I'm more nervous than him, I'd like to point out.
Can't be possible.
So the first project, we've done it so we can count down, so we know if we're running out of time, we can speed up. This is, it's quite a sort of big range of projects that we're showing today, but we thought hopefully it would just take you through the sort of way that we work on things. This was a very sort of unpromising project in some ways when we first started. We were asked to do a temporary hoarding for a shop at the bottom of Piccadilly Lights, which one of our clients owns, and it's the shop that's now opened as Barclays. And they asked us to put a hoarding up for just sort of 4 weeks while they did some building work. So Piccadilly Lights right in the centre of London. It's this incredible sort of beacon really of all this sort of advertising. We thought perhaps we could turn this into something a bit more interesting. Oops. So we built an enormous light switch over the site, and the brief was about telling people that Land Securities owned this. So we did that small over there and did this enormous switch. One of the problems we had is you have to get planning permissions for these sorts of things from Westminster Council. So we put it up at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Well, we didn't, somebody else did. Yeah.
Somebody else did, and they said all you need to do is turn up with ladders and wear fluorescent jackets, and then no one will ask you what you're doing. So this went up overnight, and then and stayed there for about sort of 6 to 8 weeks in the end because the building work got a bit delayed behind it. But created a really nice sort of talking point from something that started off as something sort of quite unpromising. We tried to get them to turn the lights off for when we installed it, and then we'd turn it on again and have a big sort of show. But they said it would cost about £3 million, so we didn't do that. But the thing we really liked about this was that once it went up, suddenly all these photographs started appearing on sort of Flickr and Facebook of tourists coming along and putting their fingers up and turning this switch on and off, which we thought was really nice. So it started appearing all over the place. Most people quite enjoyed it, apart from this man. But I don't know why he posted this picture up. Seems a bit strange, but anyway. So that's the first project.
The other thing we do like doing is we like working at different scales. This is a completely opposite end of the scale. We've been lucky enough to work on a series of stamps, which we're going to show you today. The first one was just a kind of one-off stamp, a bit of a strange one really, just to commemorate the end of the First World War. So we played around with lots of ideas at the beginning of this. It's quite a tough design challenge in some ways. Kept coming back to this idea of the poppy, which is obviously very iconic kind of image, but somewhat overused. So in our research, we kind of looked up lots of sort of battlefield pictures and ended up playing around with the observation that the stems of the poppy kind of looked like barbed wire, so we ended up fusing these two things together. And what's quite interesting, at a tiny little scale like this, we quite like the idea that some of these ideas are actually quite hidden, and you have to kind of decode them to sort of to remember them. And then this proved so popular that they asked us to do a whole series of these. So we kind of really racked our brains and came up with a whole different way of doing this. So using poppies as a kind of generic theme. And again, that photograph of the kind of soldiers going over the top was kind of almost hidden. It's very bizarre seeing it that big up there, I have to say. And we kind of carried on with this theme. We found an old photograph of a captain that had been killed in the First World War at the Imperial War Museum, and we kind of thought it looked a bit like paper. So we kind of montaged it with the paper-like folds of the poppy just to hide it in. But we really enjoy working at different extremes of the scale, just to kind of challenge ourselves, really.
This one is a project we did for the Natural History Museum. We were lucky enough to win the pitch to do their identity several years ago. And this was a project that came out from that, which was to redo all of their learning and education sort of packs that they gave out to schools, which in the past used to consist of clipboards with photocopied bits of paper, and therefore you get lots of extremely bored-looking children wandering around the museum. This is what they looked like previously, which weren't the most inspiring of things, I think. And the big thing that we noticed was that we went down and watched school parties wander around, is they'd fill all these things in on the clipboards, give them back to their teacher and go home, and not have anything to keep or sort of remember it by. So we came up with a very simple idea of doing the covers as masks, which you could tear off. You fill in the whole sort of booklet behind, give that back to your teacher, tear this off, and it had little facts and figures on the back about the galleries that you'd been through. So we thought this was quite an interesting sort of starting point. Then they told us we had to do 25 of these, all on different subjects. So it then became a bit of an exercise in finding different ways of using holes without them becoming too rude.
Like so.
For the children to muck about with. Dancing ostriches, which were quite nice.
It's worth saying these models are both of our children, cheap labour, but they were told specifically not to do anything rude in the photo shoot. So. Yeah.
This one demonstrates quite well the rudeness that's possible with holes. As does this one. I think so. But one of the nice things about this really was going down there when we tested them out with the children. We worked with education consultants about the content and all that sort of stuff. Was the kids just wanted to tear these off and muck about with them, not really take any notice of the museum, if I'm honest. This one was really nice. Join the feeding frenzy. This one's called. Only works if you look in that direction. But
that's quite rude.
Yeah. Right, we're doing all right.
Another property development, we've been lucky enough to work for Land Securities for years, and they're a really visionary client. Let us do pretty much whatever we wanted, which was quite amazing, actually. This was for a new build project they did in the City of London. And one of the things they told us that they were going to reuse something like 85% of the materials from the previous building that they'd kind of demolished to make the new building. So we thought this was a really interesting idea and a way of kind of getting across to the public that it was a point of difference. So we kind of asked this sculptor friend of ours called Beanie, who's a genius with 3D materials, to literally go down onto the site and rummage around in the skips to kind of gather all these kind of materials, all weird and wonderful things being thrown out. And we really like the idea of something being built or kind of growing out of this big pile of rubble. So we asked him to do a whole series of these kind of sculptural trees. This one was for plumbing materials, including the kitchen sink. And these were about 2.5, 3 meters tall. And he kind of built these literally within a couple of weeks. Amazing kind of feat, really. This one was out of circuit boards and telephones, all sorts of things that were thrown out. And there's a whole series of these. This one's from air conditioning materials. And he even made some from kind of old carpet tiles that had been cut up. So we quite like this as a campaign thing. We used this right across the campaign. And they had a big launch event to kind of launch the new building. So we came up with the idea of installing these weird kind of looking trees, but we wanted to create a bit of an event for the launch itself. So we kind of backlit these trees, which looked a bit like weird silhouettes of normal trees. And then when the launch happened itself, we kind of turned the lights on and then revealed the kind of true nature of the kind of recycled part of the project. So it was a lot of fun doing that, actually.
This is another animal-related project. I seem to have all of those. This was another stamp project we did for Royal Mail, and we were asked to do something to celebrate Darwin's 200th anniversary. And what they wanted us to do was talk about all the different areas of study, the fact he was a botanist and a geologist and an ornithologist and things. So we were trying to think of something that would help us, a bit like the tree of life that he drew, this idea of connecting things together. So we came up with a very simple idea of doing all the stamps jigsaw shaped. We managed to convince Royal Mail to cut the stamps in these shapes, which then gave us the opportunity to use a combination of historic and modern photography to talk about all the different areas of study, which sort of ticked all the boxes for what they wanted to convey with the stamps. But the nicest bit, I think, was the fact that you could connect Darwin with an orangutan.
We did find the picture that looked the most like him, actually.
Yes.
We tried to, anyway.
What was quite interesting is we thought Royal Mail might be a bit offended by this, so that when we did the set, we put them as far apart as possible. But then we sent letters that cost us a fortune for several months, so that you could just join these two stamps together. It's like sort of continuity we thought was quite nice. This led on to another project. Pogonology is the study of beards, we found out. We were asked by Darwin 200 to produce a campaign and a poster for them. And we commissioned, so we started off again with this amazing portrait and the tree of life. And we commissioned an amazing illustrator called Ken Mickey in Japan, who we had to brief, knowing that we couldn't speak any Japanese and he can't speak any English. So we did a few sketches and sent them over to him. And it was basically the idea of having one line that connected everything that he'd ever studied and almost like a sort of timeline of his life. And very simply, it made his beard. Just an absolutely incredible illustration, and not something we could obviously have created by ourselves.
This was a very strange project we did for the Salvation Army. Amazing organisation. This was an environmental graphics project we did for their international headquarters that they were rebuilding in London. And the bizarre thing about the Salvation Army is this is pretty much what they looked like when we turned up, actually, has to be said. Quite scary, intimidating, all dressed in their full uniform. It's run by the kind of G9, which are these 9 generals, really savvy, very, very clever people. And the weird thing about winning this project was we're about the least religious people you could ever meet. So we had a bit of brushing up to do on our religious knowledge, including the Bible stories for the very young, just to remind ourselves what it was all about again. But the weird thing about their previous building, their old building, was this kind of slightly scary looking Victorian kind of edifice, very kind of closed off and very scary looking. The new building was completely the opposite. It was all a big glass sort of open box, basically, very, very transparent and open. A bit cold, so we thought, well, how can we kind of use this transparency as an idea? And we came up with this idea of a sort of modern twist on stained glass. So the idea of kind of colouring the windows so that the light kind of shone through. So what we did was we made all the graphics, all the glass panels transparent, so all the graphics you could see through. So this kind of had two effects. At night time, the whole building was lit up, and this would kind of glow outwards. And we also set these kind of Bible quotes all around the front of the building. And because you kind of had these different layers of glass, you got this very, very different looking kind of perception of the Salvation Army. A lot of people thought it was an ad agency, actually, rather than the Salvation Army, and we thought that was quite cool, actually. So we like the idea of people almost looking twice at this and thinking about them in a new light. And we had a lot of fun. They had to help us massively with trying to find these quotes because we knew nothing. And and we had to get it just to fit exactly the right space. And we had something like metre-high quotes going all the way around the building. So it was a lot of fun. We even we used Gill Sands to kind of do all the typography. We even redrew the cross of the T to be a cross. So there was lots of kind of attention to detail stuff. And there was a lot of fun had with the language in some of the manifestations. And what you kind of got, because the sun would kind of stream through, you get these big kind of shafts of coloured light coming through, which kind of lit up the interior of the building. And what was nice about this is it was a proper collaboration really between us and the architects, and it had hats off to them for letting us mess up their nice building for them.
Right, number 12. Creature Compass, this is a very different sort of project for us. We do a lot of work for the British Heart Foundation, and they approached us to produce what they called a bereavement resource, which was a very sort of very tricky brief, really, very difficult sort of subject matter and really quite hard to get our heads around. So we went onto Amazon and looked up lots of these things that exist, and it was basically a pack for children who'd lost a parent or a close relative to heart disease. And we just felt a lot of these looked slightly inappropriate. Someone very important has died. The idea of giving that to somebody after they've just died sounds a bit... But, so we looked at these and we thought, you know, it's an amazing resource which they just basically give away to anyone that's had these sort of issues. And so we sat down with a professional storyteller who was also a children's counsellor and wrote this story with her, which was all about a small creature who lived in a forest who had a friend called Bird, who he loved. And basically the story goes on that he wakes up and Bird's disappeared, and makes me quite sad, actually. And he wakes up and Bird's disappeared and there's no answer, he doesn't know where he is. So we thought this, actually when you read the story that she wrote, it was really very moving, and the creature goes through all these different emotions of getting angry and then sad and then despondent and then bewildered and all these sorts of things. So we spoke to some other children's counsellors and they said, whatever we do has to be very sort of tactile as a pack. So we looked at using felt as a material, and we created this small creature working with an illustrator we use quite a lot. And she came up with this amazing drawing of this character that basically changes colour and just using very simple sort of movements completely changes its mood as he goes through the book. So we created this little pack that was in a cloth bag that had a little felt toy, had this booklet, and a few other sort of practical things you could do to try and overcome some of the problems. All the illustrations were done where something was always missing, so all of the friends he meets are all hidden in this tree. And this is Bird at the beginning, so it's all sort of very jolly, and it gradually gets more depressing as the book goes on. It gets a bit happier at the end, but not very much. But even within this, he goes through this sort of rocky place and he gets completely lost, and the shape of Bird is sort of hidden in the rocks and things. But very much done as a storybook, and the BHF logo is just put on the back, and it's all very sort of subtly done. But it also includes this little stage set, so you can, what the counsellors were saying is children like to sort of recreate little scenes from the book and assign memories of the person they've lost to buttons and things like that. So incredibly moving project to do. And the idea of having this little creature that you could sort of just slip in your pocket and it would just remind you of that person. That's the most depressing bit of the talk.
Hopefully it goes up from there. Another set of stamps we did, I'll whiz through this pretty quick. This was a kind of double anniversary, really. It was the 100th anniversary of the first Morse code signal, the SOS signal, and also the Rescue at Sea service, the kind of voluntary service. And again, just kind of digging up the background to the project, we came across this amazing photographer who is a seascape photographer by trade. So he takes these stunning kind of seascapes, but he's also a lifeboatman. He's a volunteer on the crew. So we got access to some great kind of training exercises to kind of take these shots. And we just kind of made the most of these kind of seascapes and just pulled out the kind of fluorescent orange that they use for the kit. But again, one of the nicest things we kind of suggested to the Royal Mail, which is quite a big deal for the Royal Mail to kind of change cutters, is to change the perforations, the kind of the holes that are punched through to dots and dashes, so it actually spells out SOS around the stamps. And again, we quite like that idea that some people might never discover this idea, but to us it kind of it amused us, and therefore hopefully some nerdy kind of stamp collector out there who's going to find it one day.
This one I'll try and whip through quite quickly because it's a bit complicated, but we do quite a lot of hoarding work around London for various sort of buildings and schemes. And a lot of the time hoardings look a bit like this. They get painted by developers, somebody writes something quite poignant on it. Or designers and estate agents get hold of it and they do this. I think I prefer the first one. And they produce these sorts of things. And I think from our perspective, we're thinking, you know, what a great sort of canvas you've got, and the fact that you can actually turn it into something much more interesting for people walking past, rather than just this barrier to something that's being built behind. So this was a big scheme in Victoria, in London, the centre of London, and we thought it would be interesting to try and dig up lots of facts and figures all about the history of Victoria and what happened in the area. So we came up with this idea of an A to Z of Victoria, and then we designed whole sets of letters. We designed about 3 alphabets in the end because everyone got a bit carried away. But stories like this, that William Caxton printed his first book in England, in Victoria, the history of the busby and the bearskin, which is what those Grenadier Guards wear. So this was cut out of bearskin. It was fake bearskin because we couldn't get any real bearskin. The Jewel Tower is one of the towers in the Westminster, Palace of Westminster. So we basically created a whole alphabet. And what we did in the studio is that we just gave lots of different letters to different people and really didn't try and compare them. So we got this nice sort of eclectic mix. And then we just printed them on this sort of huge scale on the hoardings down Victoria. And I think you can see from this, the fact that normally, you know, these are quite plain and you can just see the building work behind, but we wanted really to create almost like a sort of little gallery in some ways of these big letters.
This is almost like a college project. We kind of pretty much wrote the brief ourselves, and talking about kind of pushing back on clients, this was a classic case where we just said to them, look, we're just going to go and do this. You have to trust this. It's going to work. And luckily they did.
Yeah. This one's quite nice because the N is for New Scotland Yard, which is the head of the police headquarters in Victoria. And we managed to find a policeman reading it. So. That D was for deck chairs. The X proved a bit of a problem, so we did it about voting in Westminster. We thought that was a way around that. The one on the right-hand side was quite nice. Was all about the pelicans in St James's Park. So we drew this big P out of pelicans, and then in one of them, there was this story recently of the fact that some pelicans eat pigeons. That they open their mouths. I still don't really believe this, but I've seen it on YouTube. They open their mouths, and the pigeons almost fall in. And the pelicans just close their mouths again. Anyway, we didn't tell land securities about this, we just did this. And they haven't told us about it yet. But what it then meant is we could, this first hoarding, there's going to be about 3 of these, is probably about 2 kilometres long, so it goes right around this massive scheme. So we just spelt out big sort of sentences about know Victoria or explore Victoria. I don't know what that one says, but it says something else. And this was one of the alphabets that we did.
Back to apes again. We seem to have an extraordinary amount of animals, like Michael's work, actually. This one was for, again, coming back to orangutans, fantastic-looking animals. This is for a small charity we kind of got introduced called the Sumatran Orangutan Society. Sounds like a made-up name. Another SOS. We absolutely love the name. We love what they were doing. They're basically sort of a tiny group of people really dedicated to protecting orangutans in Indonesia. And we kind of wanted to have a bit of fun with this, so we kind of drew the ape's face using kind of these brackets and then spelt out the name to create this little character. And again, this is a classic case where they had some pretty serious messages they wanted to get across about deforestation and the kind of plight of these animals. But we kind of wanted to make sure that we used this kind of wit and humour where it was appropriate. And there's some pretty shocking facts in here, things like every minute of every day, 6 football fields are disappearing from Indonesia, from Sumatra. And consequently, these orangutans are literally going to be extinct within 10 years unless somebody does something about it. So it was pretty worthy stuff and pretty shocking. But and really the thing with them is they had no money at all. So every single piece of communication we did for them had to work really, really hard. And they would go for these meetings, kind of fundraising meetings with people to try and drum up some money. And they would leave. We came up with this idea of these little door hangers. that we kind of asked them to leave behind in the offices, so that kind of getting their message out across to people. Again, having a bit of fun with the animals. And these were just left lying around. And the other thing they did, they had fundraising evenings with comedians in London to kind of raise money for them. And we came up with this pretty obvious idea of monkey plus comedy equals banana skin, really. So again, this is the idea. We had these kind of fake banana skins cut out, like giant stickers, actual size, and literally plastered the whole of these auditoriums with these kind of fake banana skins, which got us into big trouble with the health and safety people who actually wanted them all removed because they thought people were actually going to slip up on them, which was slightly ironic. But what actually turned out was that by the end of the evening, all these messages had kind of disappeared. People had stolen them, and so hopefully the message was kind of getting out there. So through a bit of fun and humour, hopefully the message was kind of getting out to the public.
I'll whip through this one quite quickly as well. We were lucky enough to get approached by Quentin Blake, a fabulous children's illustrator, to do the identity for a new museum of illustration that's opening up, hopefully in London in a couple of years. And they came to us and said basically they wanted to open up this museum of illustration and be able to show lots of different styles of illustration. So very simply we come up with the idea of using a sketchbook page, almost like a sort of blank canvas, for their mark, and then basically whoever illustrator they were having an exhibition of or showing, they could do a whole range of different illustrations. But the nicest bit was, so this was just showing, and sometimes the illustrations broke out and things like this. So it was quite a big identity for them. But the nicest bit was this. This was the business cards we did for them, which we did as tiny little mini sketchbooks, which I have here. And so it just meant because they were going for a lot of fundraising meetings, and Quentin would be sort of wheeled into these meetings, they'd sit and they'd tear out pages from a sketchbook and give you their business cards. And they had a whole range of different illustrations on the back. And this became a real nice talking point because you almost felt like they were giving you a little drawing with their details on the back. So this was an example of that. And the problem with this is that they ended up having to give out whole books of business cards to everybody they met.
Cost them a fortune, actually.
So it did cost them quite a lot of money. But they got the illustrations for nothing, so that was fine. But just as an identity, it worked for things like labels and bags and book spines and things like that.
There's another charity client. This is one of the first clients we worked for, actually, called Fairbridge, who deal with kind of young kids, urban kids, who get themselves into a lot of trouble. And for a lot of kind of 14 to 18-year-olds, they're pretty much the last chance to kind of, before they end up in prison, pretty much, so their last ditch sort of attempt to save them. And we've been working with them for a long time, actually, and every year we do their annual report, so every year we kind of try and reinvent the wheel. This was a recent one we did for them, actually, where we wanted to kind of tell the personal stories of these kids, and they actually turned their lives around. So we kind of worked with them as a slightly odd idea. We kind of did workshops with them to get them to draw out their kind of emotions and the kind of troubled lives they had before they got to Fairbridge. And we got them to draw them on these kind of brown paper bags. And which was quite interesting as a workshop idea. And then we managed to persuade them somehow, I don't know how we did this, but to actually put them over their heads for a photo shoot. So we kind of shot them all with these kind of slightly uncomfortable looking, slightly scary looking masks almost over their heads that told their kind of emotions before they came to Fairbridge. And then obviously we kind of then showed the flip side, the positive side of how Fairbridge had kind of helped turn their lives around. And this became a bit of a bigger campaign. We used it on an annual report, for viral films, even for actually them drawing out the work. And what was interesting, actually working with them, just made the whole thing much more sort of real and for us, much more interesting and a really fun project to work on. And we used this across all the print work that they do, including posters and viral films. And they've been very successful this year in fundraising to try and get that message out there.
I'd quite like to talk about this one briefly. This was a project, sort of self-initiated project, that my mum asked me just after my dad died to clear out my dad's garage. I hated my dad's garage because it was full of spiders. And
it's not like Dana's garage, has to be said.
No, it's not quite the same as Dana's garage because it looks like this. Doesn't have a Harley Davidson in it, unfortunately. I managed to press gang my daughter into helping me because I didn't want to do it by myself. And we got over there, and one of the first things we found was this. which was a set of Allen keys, which somebody had torn off the top to create this amazing spider. So straight away I suddenly thought, well, forget about tidying it up, we'll just photograph everything in the garage instead, and produce this little book from it. So Jess and I spent 2 days on a sunny summer's day photographing things in the garage. And it became this little book that was full of all sorts of different things rather than just spiders. So robots, made of hinges and electrical plates. This is Zorro and his collection of moustaches. These were 2 large-nosed men that I found. What was very nice about these is we didn't do any sort of retouching. We literally just found them, put them on a little light box, and then photographed them on a crappy little camera. But it became this little book with sort of bugs and butterflies and more bugs. The solar system, which is a circular saw and some washers. And it became this book that Jess and I published through Hattrick. Even the barcode was a little nuts and bolts. And this amazing quote, which I think is incredible, which we put on the back. I don't think Jessica's going to become a designer, but never mind.
This is kind of back to Dana's film earlier on, that something that clients are always asking us to do. And this, the background behind this was a huge development site in the southeast of England. They were kind of redoing this entire kind of chalk pit that had been disused for years to develop it for housing. And they'd spent millions of pounds and millions of tons of earth had kind of been moved. So they actually asked us to kind of make the logo bigger. So that's exactly what we did for them. We ended up getting, in a very low-tech way, the landscape architects on site to draw out this 70-metre diameter logo. So we really did make the logo bigger. And it's done in a really low-tech way. It was just a couple of guys with a rotavator just carving up this enormous space. And we kind of filmed it, again, part of a campaign that we kind of ran for the thing. And it was just a bit of fun in actually using the scale for this. And what we ended up doing for this is then we kind of got carried away and ended up doing a whole series of these. So there was one for the kind of unfinished roads, the kind of infrastructure they were building, which was on this massive scale, and then drew these out and photographed them. Some of the community work they'd been doing with the local community, even down to the wildlife they were kind of introducing back into this enormous kind of vast area.
Right, the last few, we'll try and speed up. This is a amazing project we were lucky enough to work on last year. A group of photographers called In Public, street photographers, who this job was such a joy to work on. We had no time in the studio, so we ended up going at the weekends, and they would send us these portfolios of photographs to use. This one particularly, every time I opened it up, just made me really smile. This one was very nice as well. It's Matt Stewart. Pigeons in Trafalgar Square. But really nice project, and all they asked us really to do was produce a book for their 10th anniversary. This one is just unbelievably good.
It's a bit like Star Wars, isn't it?
Yeah. And we wanted to show you this project really just so we could show you that photograph. But it was, just to run through it very quickly, it was 10 years of work, 10 photographs each person. This is Nick Turpin, who published the book, fantastic street photographer. And we just were trying to think of what we could do that wouldn't clash with the photography. So we came up with a very simple typographic idea of just moving the zero, making this little face with one of his eyes closed. And this became the cover of the book. And then very simply, we did little divider pages between each photographer, and used a different typeface just to create these faces, all as different 10s. So that just reads, 10 photographs by Matt Stewart, for example. And on the back, we just printed a few details about them. And this is Nick holding the book.
Final couple. This is for SOM architects. Big architects we kind of done a couple of projects with, and they were always complaining about the fact every time they had to do a proposal for new clients, they'd have to kind of reinvent it and rebuild it. We kind of thought very long and hard with it. At the time, I'd been kind of collecting these old postcard albums where you used to slot these kind of classic postcards into these lovely old albums. And this kind of gave us the idea of one of the problems they face is they have projects that are very tall and thin, like great big towers, or very wide, like landscape projects, and we kind of had to fit all of this stuff in. So we kind of asked the question of ourselves, why can't we actually build a brochure? I don't know if you can see that very well. The idea is we made this brochure that had no printing in it at all, and we just die cut this kind of angled grid throughout every single page, which meant you could slot in these kind of case studies, any which size that you wanted to do, in any order that you wanted to do, so you can build the whole book from scratch. So it effectively became like a modern version of a postcard album. And what that meant was that they could actually slot in the images to kind of tailor to the client. And they even wrote in kind of handwritten messages for personalised things, or if they'd won awards. And it was almost like a bit of print becoming architecture, really. Final one.
And the very last one, which I'll run through really quickly, this was another sort of personal project. Went on holiday with the kids and got somewhere and I got really bored, so I made a pack of cards from some paper that was so thin you could see the lettering through it. But anyway, I thought this is something quite interesting to do, so I decided to design a set of typographic playing cards. This was what Jessica referred to as my mental sketchbook. She thinks I'm mad. But I drew a few rules up about not repeating typefaces, and I've never really been very good at typography, so I thought this would be quite a good exercise in sort of getting better at it. And these are just some of the cards from that. Some of these look really easy, but I found them really hard, actually. But, the one on the right was the last one that I did, and it seemed to take ages to sort of crack it. And it looks like it took about 10 seconds. But, and then I just did a little pattern on the back to look like playing cards that just repeated all the type. And this was a little proverb we found, which we thought was quite apt.